Mr Speaker.
Carmel Sepuloni.
Mr Speaker, Marama Fox from the Māori Party said that when things go wrong, when there's problems with something, that the opposition's first position is to say cut it. At no point have we said cut it, Mr Speaker, but what we're saying is that the responsible thing now is to explore the findings of the Auditor-General and to ask questions why, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we support the concept of whānau ora, we support the idea of integrated service provision, we support the idea of addressing the needs of a whole family rather than just an individual, but we have to ask questions following the release of this report. Mr Speaker, the biggest question we have to ask is around spending. 1/3 of the money put towards whānau ora, so $42.3 million, went towards administration of the program. Now, Mr Speaker, I want to say that I understand when you start something new that there are going to be additional administrative costs, but 1/3 of the funding going towards administration is something that needs to be explored. Mr Speaker, the thing is too, with that $42.3 million, 1/3 of the funding that went towards whānau ora that has been attributed to administration, that $42.3 million is only the administrative costs at the TPK level and at the commissioning agency level. Mr Speaker, if you look at the providers who then would be commissioned by the commissioning agencies, there's going to be further administrative costs there. Now, I don't think that the administrative costs of those providers will reach 1/3 of the funding that they get. But if they were to reach that level of funding, Mr Speaker, you'd be spending 2/3 of the funding allocated towards whānau ora on administration at the TPK level, at the commissioning agency level, and then at the provider level. And you'd only effectively, out of $130 million, be left with about $40 million that would be going directly to whānau. Now, Mr Speaker, that was never the intention of the program from what we believe with regards to when the Māori Party first announced it. The idea was that more money would go directly towards helping whānau. If only $40 million, 1/3 of the funding, is actually reaching whānau after you take the administration from TPK, the commissioning agencies and then the providers, well, effectively, Mr Speaker, this is how much money those individuals who were getting help were getting. We know there were 43,000 because Te Ururoa Flavel said about 43,000 individuals were helped by whānau ora funding and about 9,000 families. Well, if you add that up and say that only $40 million made it to the actual ground, then that would be less than $100 per person that benefited in some way from whānau ora. That would be only $444 per family that benefited from whānau ora. So you can see here, Mr Speaker, that there are real problems with the way in which whānau ora is operating under the national government, and we need to investigate it further. It's not just us being cynical on this side of the House, but actually it's the responsible thing to do. And it's actually what the Auditor-General said needs to be done. It needs to be explored further. This is not us just criticising for the sake of criticising. This is us being the watchdog of Parliament, holding the government to account on their spending and saying actually this is not responsible, nor is it acceptable, Mr Speaker. $42.3 million on administration just at the TPK and at the commissioning agency level. Mr Speaker, I was running an NGO for 3 years before coming in here, a Pacific NGO, and I know how hard our NGO sector work. I know how hard they're working on the smell of an oily rag, that many of the providers out there have had no funding increases for the last 6 years under that national government, Mr Speaker. I also know that it wasn't all smooth sailing when the whānau ora funding was rolled out. There were problems that occurred, Mr Speaker, even within my own Pacific community. Competition that came about that wasn't necessarily the healthiest. There were issues there with regards to the relationships and the collaboration that was happening or not happening in the sector, and so those things need to be investigated as well, Mr Speaker. I do want to also just touch on the fact that the whānau ora approach is about supporting whānau rather than just individuals looking at the whole whānau. Mr Speaker, it's been problematic, and the report points this out, because that culture or that kaupapa isn't necessarily adopted by the two main ministries that are working alongside whānau ora, that being the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Social Development. There are inconsistencies there that also need to be addressed, Mr Speaker. It is our responsibility as a parliament to explore this further.